Hi, my name is Karen. I'm coming to you today from Straightway Mental Health Ministry to talk to you about my autism diagnosis journey. It was apparent from when I was really young that I was not like, other children. I remember just, I didn't like to be held, and I didn't think that was really big deal at the time, or I didn't think much of it until later on when it was brought up in the autism diagnosis thing. That I have a vague memory of, you know, just remembering that being held was very boring and that I would rather play. And I remember like my mom trying to hold me when there was company there and I wanted loose to play. And that's all I really remember about that. But it was kind of something that we noticed from an early age that there was neurodiversity there. But I was born in the 1970s in a little raised in a little coal mining village, and the doctors then didn't know about autism. It was a rare diagnosis. When it was given to boys that had intellectual disabilities, and I think a lot of the reason why it wasn't seen when I did get into the mental health world was because I am a female, and so I uh, I would stim. I still stim. I rock. I would play with little toys that were not appropriate for my age. They were for younger kids growing up, and it was me doing a type of stimming. I would chew on things. Uh, I had particular problems with math, and a lot of people with autism are very good at math, but I was really awful on it. Looking back, I found out that I had a problem called dyscalculia, and that it was kind of a neurodiversity thing. It was similar to dyslexia, only I just couldn't learn numbers. I was counting on my fingers at an age that I should have been more advanced than that, and there was just this mental block, and that just way that math was taught to me was not a nice way. Let's put it that way, because it was seen as this kid is just not willing to learn and too lazy to learn math. It's just saying that I had a mental disability when it came to math. And so I was writing at an early age when I was in the third and fourth grade. I was writing in books that my mom would pick up and read, and she thought I copied it from a book, but it was something I'd written myself. Mostly what I remember socially is I didn't have many friends. I wanted to hang out with kids that were younger than me because my development was that of somebody that was younger than me. And whenever my parents would take us to visit people, I would embarrass them because I wouldn't know how to act. I would look in their cupboards. I would do all sorts of just inappropriate things, and it wasn't me trying to be a jerk. It was just that I honestly didn't know how to act. So, uh, whenever it became really noticeable, I was around in the fifth grade, and around the age of 10, which I had turned 10 in the fifth grade, is whenever things start to be really noticeable difference between the autistic kids and the neurotypical kids. And that's when I started to have behavioral problems in school. And it just was a thing where I felt like whether I acted up to get attention or not, that I was in trouble because part of me really didn't know how to act. I was had one particular teacher that I was very bad in his class, and then I had another teacher that I wasn't doing anything in her class at all to get attention. And I was getting corrected by her all the time, and she was attending the parent teacher conferences with the teacher that I was behaving badly in, but I didn't do anything in her class to act up. I just was getting yelled at for stuff and I didn't understand why. And it was just a lack of social skills. There's also a problem with inattentive ADHD that was going on. And my mom would say that I was always off in my little world and that I marched to the beat of a different drummer. And uh, I mean, whenever I first was, found out that people with autism are likely to be ADHD, that they are likely to have the ADHD. As soon as I heard, the symptoms of ADHD, I knew that I had the inattentive ADHD. So I was always kind of very imaginative and off in my own little world. And yeah, I mean, it felt normal to me because that's what normal was for me. I really don't know what it's like to have someone else's experience. So around the time when I was in fifth grade and I started acting up was also around the time that I started getting into the witchcraft books from the school library, and it took me down a very dark path that I wouldn't want anyone to go on. I know people in the witchcraft say don't judge me. It's not that I'm looking at you and judging you, it's that I don't want anyone to go through what I went through. And so that's when a lot of the symptoms, or I believe I was misdiagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, eventually came from. So I went through, that's when I started having the, I call disability of having to see the, spirits that I see. And that was happening on a nightly basis. So that started when I was around in sixth grade, and it continued until I was junior in high school before I said a word to another human being about it. Uh, and so I had the symptoms, I had the stimming, I had a lot of the thoughts that I have seen where, are types of thoughts that ADHD and autism people have. I had a lot of what my mom would call a one track mind, and that I would get obsessed with certain subjects and obsessed with certain people. And the people I get obsessed with are just plain ordinary people. If it's if it's a female I'm obsessed with, it's not a sexual thing. It's always that I want to be like her. I want to look like her. There is some aspect of her that I wish I saw in me, and a lot of times it's that she's the women I've become obsessed with aren't afraid to speak their mind. And for a long time, I thought that they had really ideal lives, but eventually I found out that they were people and that they had problems and that their problems might be different than mine, but they were still people that weren't perfect, and that they didn't need put up on a pedestal, even though they didn't have the same problems as I do. The men, at first, when I was younger, when I was obsessed with the male, it was sexual, but as I got older, it wasn't so much. It was, there's the one guy that I got obsessed with for a while that I felt like he was living a secret life and that uh, he had a really exciting life, but I was told that he didn't. But I would develop fascinations with certain topics, certain subjects. As I get older and I was saved, it came to be a lot of religious stuff, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So, growing up, my parents knew something was wrong with me, and my mom took me to the one doctor. I believe he was Dr. DeAndrea, who delivered me, and he acted like there was nothing wrong, that my mom didn't know what she was talking about. So we saw him, and I don't remember that, but whenever I got older, I wanted to get help, and eventually my parents allowed me to see a certain teacher for socially and emotionally disturbed children. They didn't want me to see that teacher for a while because they said that the other kids would get made fun of me if they knew that I was going, and the school had told my mom, the program, that most of the kids are so caught up in their own lives that they aren't going to notice. And so, for the most part, that was extremely right. I did have one student catch on that I was going somewhere to see a special teacher, but that was only said to me a couple of times. The vast majority of the time, you know, the uh, the vast majority of the time, nobody noticed when I was called to leave the classroom, even though it was the same class, the same time every week. No one really noticed. In high school, I was just really obsessed with one of my teachers, and he was one of my special interests. And uh, the thing is, he had showed kindness to me, and I had taken that a step further, and they had to take measures against me that I wasn't allowed to take chemistry class, and my homeroom had to be farther from his homeroom, and different stuff. And to me, it was just basically I didn't get along with my dad, and he was like a father figure to me, even though I wanted to have a relationship with him, and it was totally unrealistic because he was married with children, and I knew that was wrong at the time to try and be involved with him, but I was just became totally obsessed. In high school, I also had, come out and stated, look, I know I need professional help, and it was something that at the time my family had been avoiding. They tell me now that it was because they didn't like the medications that some of the people were on, which in the late 80s and early 90s, medications that they had out for psychiatric reasons were very disabling. I heard just a lot of them not wanting to take me to Evansburg, is what I heard at the time. It was, years later, my mom told me about the medications, and just I'm trying to talk about the issue without indicating anyone or trying to blame anyone, but I'm just saying that my home life whenever I was a teenager was not good. Uh, eventually, I saw it was Dr. Kenneth Sneed, and I had sought him out on my own because I knew I needed help, and he made the first diagnosis, which the first diagnosis was of schizophrenia, and so he had put me on a drug. The brand name of the drug is Mellaril. The off-brand generic name is Thioridazine. My parents called it Thorazine. Thorazine is a related antipsychotic. They're very much similar, but they're different things. And so uh, we had me going to counseling and being on medication. And so every time I went to see Dr. Sneed, he would ask me about my alternative reality that I had at the time. And I was just confident that he wasn't going to make it go away. And so he would increase it, and pretty much I turned into a zombie. I took the SATs my junior year. I got a score of 590 on the SATs because I was on so much medicine that I pretty much couldn't remember my first name. And so I don't remember a lot of my junior and senior year in high school. I was on a lot of medication, and then they came to say, we don't think that what's wrong with Karen is schizophrenia. We think it's something else, and we want to send her somewhere to be tested further. And so they brought up Western Psychiatric Institute and Clinic, and they brought up the Meadows, and there was also a place in Maryland that I don't know the name of to send me, and I wound up going to Western Psychiatric Institute and Clinic at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center in Pittsburgh. I went in there January 31st of 1992, and I was on a lot of medication. They wanted me there for testing, and so they took me off the Mellaril or Thioridazine, and they didn't they didn't slowly take me off because they wanted to do testing, and for the testing to be accurate, I had to be totally off the medication, and it would, I guess, be take too long and too hard to slowly wean me off. So it took me off of it just cold turkey, and I went through all the withdrawals and the psychotic episodes from not taking the medication, and at one point I even lost my ability to see clearly, and everything was very blurry, and I couldn't make out what things were. And but that got better. It wasn't long term, and so I went there, and they did neuropsychological testing, and they had me see. They did MRI, and they had me see Dr. Nancy Minshew, and she's a doctor, a psychiatrist who specializes in autism, and Dr. Nancy Minshew was the first person to recognize that I had autism, and she told my parents that. And I also saw another psychiatrist. I don't know his name. And I know his date of birth, that he was born on May 16th of 1944. And I know that because I have this unusual ability, or used to have this unusual ability, to memorize dates. And so he came to my room, and we talked, and he said about, I told him that I was born the year before the Vietnam War ended, and he was born the year before World War II ended. And so we had this conversation about why the mind would make up for characters, to things to be there that aren't there, and that it can be because of trauma related things, that I created alternative reality because I wanted to escape. And he had another opinion of why I saw the demons or monsters, but his ideas were not correct. And so I remember him, and he was a nice guy. And at the end, my diagnosis was of a mixed personality disorder. My mother had thought that I had at some time been diagnosed with multiple personality disorder. Multiple personality disorder is very rarely diagnosed. A mixed personality disorder was of borderline narcissistic, histrionic, and schizotypical features. And I really don't. I think that a lot of why I got that diagnosis was because of the times that females that had autism were often given instead a misdiagnosis of personality disorders, because autism was seen as a boy's disorder, as a male disorder. It was not seen as a female disorder. I was taken off all of the medications that I was at, and the hospital had recommended that I go to a different school when I got out, but I only had a few months until graduation, so I went back to Northern Cambria. And one of the reasons I also know that the personality disorder is incorrect is because personality disorders are caused by abuse and neglect in the first 3 years of life. And that isn't part of my story. And my parents and I we did have a lot of problems with me growing up, but my mom really enjoyed us when we were babies, and my dad was really good with us when we were babies, and I obviously don't remember anything from when I was under 3 years old, but I know how they were with kids, and I know how they were with all my siblings, and I know that it's incorrect to say that I went through all of that stuff whenever I was under 3 years old because of those reasons. So I got out and went home and graduated high school, and there were continued problems at home, and then I went away to Upward Bound, which is a program I was in at St. Francis College, and it was a program for high school kids that had parents who didn't go to college or had parents who were on a low income, and so we got to go through this program, and part of it was educational, but a lot of it was also a lot of fun activities. It wasn't necessarily for people with disabilities, but it was just a program for kids that didn't have the same advantages to try to steer us into getting into college. So I went there and I was able to get OVR, an Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, money to go to college. And I went to Mount Aloysius, and basically there I was socially odd, and I didn't have a lot of friends. I had a friend named Angela who's different from Angela I'm friends with today, and she was my friend my first year there. And then my second year, I had a couple other friends, Lynn and Deanne, and I have lost touch with them. I've seen Lynn once in a while, and I've seen like Deanne like one time whenever since I got out. But so I've seen Lucy a couple times. We went to school together, but mostly I kept to myself because I really didn't know how to make friends. And I got very good grades in college. I didn't get good grades in high school because I didn't feel like I had any hope. I didn't feel like there was any reason or motivation to get good grades. So I just uh went to the mount and studied and got good grades and kept to myself, and I went to Mount Aloysius College. And so I was, due to graduate December of 1994, and during the summers I would go to Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and CRS group homes. And so I went into the partial care group home. It was called Little Oak. I think it was like 822 Oak Street or something. And while I was there, I started dating my ex-husband, and uh, he was somebody that he was my first love. And I did have a boyfriend in kindergarten and elementary school, but it wasn't really a romantic relationship. We were just kind of friends who were, boy and girl. But this was, relationship that went in with this person, and I had been tempted to. I had been saved in January of that year. Lynn had taken me to uh, First Christian Church in Evansburg, and I was going there, and I got saved. And then I met this, I had met him the year before. I got together with him at the end of May. It was like May 27th, 1994. And uh, we started dating, and then things were getting serious, and I was being tempted sexually and just being raised a good Catholic girl. I really felt like if I had sex, that it was going to be the end of the world, that God would never forgive me, that there was this great fear that I would just go to hell. And so he was talking to me about marrying me, and one day we ran off to Virginia, to Winchester, Virginia, and got married. And so we got married, and I had said to him, I think, we should wait to have kids. I think we should wait until we've been married at least a year, so we have a year, just the two of us. At the time, I really think that I thought I was invincible, and I didn't realize that I had limits. And so we were married, and we're living in this little apartment. And one day he says, "Let's have a baby." And I just spontaneously said, "Okay." And so we tried for me to conceive, and I conceived right away. And so I'm pregnant and going to school, and I graduated that December. I wanted to go on further. I said, well, that I would go back in the next year after the baby came. And I developed toxemia, also called preeclampsia. And we were living in the one little apartment, and then we moved back into the apartment above his mom's house, and his friend was living with us. And he was all depressed, and I didn't understand why. I just thought, well, he has a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, and he had substance abuse problems, but he had been sober for over a year, and he lost his sobriety when I got pregnant. And I didn't understand any of that. I thought, he was sober for a year. He's got the thing beat. He's not going to have a problem again. And so he was very depressed, and he was dealing with, that he had spontaneously just decided to marry me, and now he was married to this girl, and she was pregnant, and there was no way out the way he saw it. And so I uh, lived in his mom's attic, and he lived there with his friend. And uh, his he I had toxemia. I had to be on complete bed rest, and he was running around doing stuff, and he was getting very mean because he had found a doctor that took him off all his psych meds. And so eventually he got back on meds, but he had me put on meds first. And so I had the baby, and he had me put on meds and had me put back on, the antipsychotic that had been off for 3 years, and that had been proven that I didn't need. And I was given the diagnosis of schizophreniform disorder, which once you have schizophreniform disorder for 6 months, it turns into a diagnosis of schizophrenia. And so I'm arguing with this lady, Marie Goff, my therapist at Partial, worst therapist in the world. And she keeps telling me that I have schizophrenia. I'm like, no, I went to Western Psych. They did tests on me. I went there particularly for testing. They did an intensive test, and I did not have schizophrenia. And so I had to argue that with her. And then, my ex was talking about leaving me and not wanting to be with me and saying mean things to me like, oh, these people don't think you're doing well with the baby. And he kept talking about he started whenever we were in, whenever I was pregnant, about children and youth. I'm like, why in the world are you talking about children and youth? We're going to be great parents. There's not going to be a reason for them to be involved. Well, whenever we had the baby, he got children and youth involved, and he sabotaged the family. And if they didn't take the baby at first, and then he went down and just handed her over to him. And I'm not going to say what all happened there, and it's mainly because I'm protecting him. But anyway, uh, I am going through this horrible depression because my kid's gone, and my marriage was pretty. I should have just left him right then and there. I kick myself every day for not leaving him before he did what he did with the baby. So, you know, it just it was really hard. And one of the symptoms too of autism is that when we have a relationship that's abusive, we stay in it a lot of times because we don't know how to make friends. So during my marriage, I really didn't have good friends. Most of the people we hung out with were people that my ex met, and most of my friends were sleeping with my husband. And I was he became one of my special interests, and I became obsessed with him. And no matter what he did, no matter how abusive or mean or rotten it was, I stayed with him. And so I had contact with my daughter for 6 years, and uh, she was gone. And then my ex just wasn't very good to me, and I put up with it, and people said, well, it's her fault for putting up with it. I really didn't have the strength in me. I really didn't have what I needed to do. I really, it is like the book arose for Emily that the only person I had to cling to was the person that robbed me. And so eventually I did leave him, and I came to a whole new city. I had the diagnosis. It was eventually with schizoaffective disorder. I don't believe that I have schizophrenia. I don't believe that I have bipolar, but I just played the part. I would act the part. I would do the part because it was what was expected of me. And so uh, I moved here, and at first life still wasn't as good because I lived in personal care homes, and the personal care homes were abusive. But eventually I got out of those, and I the last one I was in was Warner's. And even though Mrs. Warner went to jail, Mrs. Warner was one of the better places I stayed at. And Mrs. Wesner, Darlene Wesner's was one of the better places I stayed at. But I was in some really bad places, and so I got an apartment of my own, which I had to sneak to do. And I just it took years. It took a couple of years to get over leaving my ex because he was everything to me, and I moved into a new city where I didn't know anybody. I didn't have family here. I had a great aunt who I never met who like died a few weeks after I came here, and I had the only person I knew was John Anthony that owned one of the personal care homes, and he was not a good supportive person. And I had wound up dating someone else who I never should have dated, but that relationship only lasted a few months. And then eventually I was seeing a therapist. I spoke up to her and I said, I think I have autism. My mom has said it. My friend Angela, who worked with special needs people, has said it. And at first, she just dismissed it and, said that, I had Angela, who I'd met through the mental health, peer support program, and I had Sue, who I met through Angela. Neither of them did I meet in a way that, and so I kept quiet about it. And I had been just so drilled into me by Marie Goff, who just was so forceful about you have schizophrenia, that after arguing it for so long, I just shut up and agreed with her. And I had this, saying in my head that you can call me whatever you want, but I know who I am. And so I just continued to, you know, go through the mental health system as somebody who is schizoaffective. You asked me what my diagnosis was, I'd say schizoaffective, and I just went along with it for years because I'd been silenced every time I said, look, I don't think this is what's wrong with me. And so eventually I mentioned it again to my therapist, and she mentioned that she didn't think I had it, but it's the same therapist I have now, but they have testing. She said, I can refer you. And I said no, because another person who I had known went through the autism testing and had all the symptoms, but was diagnosed with social anxiety disorder instead. And I'm like, if they're not going to diagnose that person right, they're definitely not going to diagnose me right, and a lot of things. And she eventually went to work for another agency, and I saw her there, and the issue came up repeatedly, and finally I agreed to go get testing for it. So I went to get testing, and I had to wait. It took me almost a year to get the testing. At that time, they said that I had autism. Surprisingly, they said one of my strengths was social. And, I got the diagnosis, but they kept the old diagnosis as schizoaffective. And eventually I got, also diagnosed with ADHD and put on ADHD medicine. And so recently there was some uh, just concern about, my medicine usually comes in a pack where everything's on a roll. I have it here. See, it's a roll of pills, and they didn't put the Risperdal and the Lamictal in the pack, and so they were in separate bottles, which caused me having difficulty in taking them, right? So I wound up being off the Lamictal, not intentionally, and I told my therapist, I said, well, I will put myself back on it because once you're off of it, you have to, if I miss a few doses, I have to take a little part of the pill and then slowly increase it because you can actually die from, I could actually die from taking the full dose after I've missed it for a few days. And I says, I'll get back on it. And she said that she could talk to the doctor. And I said, okay. And I saw the doctor and I hadn't talked to her about it. So I pretended, everything was okay with the meds and didn't say anything about not taking the Lamictal. But I told her yesterday, I said, look, they have me on this Lamictal. I don't think it's really hurting me, but it's not helping me. It has the side effect that it weakens your bones and affects your bone density. And I already have gone through menopause at age of 27, which is a different story. So I already have bone density issues, and I know that I have no symptoms of bipolar, and this is a mood stabilizer, and I really don't need it. I haven't taken it for a couple of weeks. I, you know, just don't see any reasons for me to take this medication, and it was a bold move because usually the whole you don't take your meds right, the the they want to hang you, they want to hang you or something. They hate you. Being non-compliant is like the worst thing that a mental health person could possibly do. I mean, my whole thing was that this medication isn't helping me. I'm taking something that if I'm not careful with could kill me, and like I said, I already have the issue of having possibly bone density issues and developing osteoporosis at an early age, and this is a medication that weakens the bones. I have agreed to take it because the alternative to it is Depakote, and Depakote is notorious for beefing up women, and I'm already morbidly obese. I had to beg and cry and plead to get taken off of Depakote. And the other alternative is lithium, and I can't take lithium because of my thyroid problems. And so I talked to my therapist yesterday, and she said that she would uh, talk to uh, talk to Dr. Cho about it, and it can possibly get me off of the Lamictal. And so it's come a long way because I had, just been bullied into faking that I had a disorder. And as in the psych ward, I'd even act the part sometimes, just, because it was what was expected of me. And so I feel like I'm a lot of steps forward to making progress. I think that schizoaffective will always probably stay on my papers because it's been on for so many years. And I think that I think that, it has to stay on because my SSI is based on schizoaffective. And, it's just what it's going to be. The Risperdal, which is an antipsychotic, I don't mind taking that much because it's known to help people who have autism with their meltdowns. And I am just finally living a life where uh, I'm understanding why I do the things I do and why I'm having the difficulties I'm doing, and that it's not a difficult is for me. It's not that I'm a bad person or that there's something morally wrong with me. It's that I have a disorder.